Hi, I'm Dr. Lisa Miller.
And I'm Nazar Yassin.
Welcome to Soul Searching, where we hear the deeper spiritual journey of some of the world's most impactful people. We hope their stories might inspire a more authentic, spiritual, purposeful life of your own.
It seemed like everything was peak decadence and no one was seeing that it was going to fall. But you can go and find God and come back and tell your kid about it. It felt like there was something, a force calling me in and a force scaring me out. But the force that was calling me in was stronger.
Paul Dalio, I am thrilled you're here. You are a storyteller, an author, a filmmaker, well known for Touched with Fire, a film which has done a great deal for the international understanding of bipolar. I'm wondering, in your very generous way, if you might share something from your own path.
Yeah, I have bipolar 1. So, when I had my journey, I came across Joseph Campbell, who helped me make sense of it. And, he sort of said there's two spiritual paths. Either you seek out the journey, you seek out the spiritual path, which is pursuing the adventure, or it seizes you. And there's what they call the refusal of the call, and you're terrified. You don't want to go with it, and you resist it, and then you accept the call and go. And the other thing Joseph Campbell said that really resonates is that he coined the phrase "follow your bliss," which a lot of people, understand and have heard, but a lot of them didn't know that the other way he phrased it is "follow your blister." And so it's the wound that you're going towards, and it's the healing of the wound you share with the world, and therefore you're healing the world by doing that. So for me, I was a normal person, completely. I was getting out of the dramatic writing program at NYU. I submitted a bunch of TV scripts to a bunch of producers. I just got a job with this producer, Peter Guber. It was 2004. We were in New York in a kind of tumultuous time. We saw the Twin Towers fall. We were, as writing students, you kind of strip away the layers to the heart and you kind of bathe it in lemon juice to try to feel the sort of sweet and sour pain and bliss of life. And I was pushing myself, hard in the writing, sleeping very little. And I started smoking marijuana, and I started to go become very heightened spiritually. When I went out to LA, at that point, I was very heightened. And
when you say share heightened spiritually, were you starting to perceive or feel?
Starting to perceive. So, for instance, it looked like everyone was a plastic imitation of some hero on the screen that was destined for the apocalypse. It seemed like everything was peak decadence, and no one was seeing that it was going to fall. And it felt like the devil was moving through people's impulses to construct some practical joke on them that they wouldn't see, but he was going to be able to laugh at them behind their backs.
So we were talking about greed.
So for instance, so it kind of hit me at this peak. I'm going into the Standard Hotel. This sign is upside down, Standard. I'm like, upside down standards, And I go in, and there's this half-naked girl behind the front desk in a glass case, as if like put on display, for like an ornament, And the whole thing was rubbing me the wrong way. It was like this. So I go into the hotel room, and I'm reading this book, and I'm reading how Peter Guber and John Peters took Sony for a ride in Hollywood. And I'm kind of absorbing all this. And then suddenly, I was like mid-whiff on a hit of weed, and there was like a lightning bolt. Suddenly, my eyes opened. This dim film lifted from my vision, and with every blink, I started seeing finer lines of God's design, and then like God wincing through my eyes at all these sinister things twisting all of his brilliance. So I'd see $1 on the table, and it would say, "In God we trust." I'm like, wait a second, we put "In God we trust" on the front of $1, and we painted it green, and like I had a flash to when I was a kid, and there were like cartoons of leaves swaying on the trees that are made of money, and like I'm like we we had kids, wish money grew on trees instead of leaves, and now it's the only green we see. And then I go outside and I see a bank that says money tree, and then I see, this apocalyptic eclipse with the word master inside it. And I'm like, oh my God, did I become a slave to a card named Master? And I'm like,
a MasterCard.
A MasterCard. And I'm like, this is just too much.
And these were living symbols. This was the symbolic reality.
The symbolic reality.
Money tree, MasterCard, a woman in a glass box, like the commodification.
That's right.
Of a human soul.
That's right.
Wow. Okay, so this exists whether or not we open our eyes, right? Yeah. Compromise, good and evil. It exists whether or not we choose to bear witness.
Yeah.
And suddenly you saw it all.
Yeah. And I didn't choose.
Yeah, and there's some ironic symbols out there. I mean, this device that we spend a lot of our time on the back of it is the fruit. The eaten fruit.
Good and evil.
I mean, that's kind of ironic, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And it did lead to a conversation with the devil eventually.
You had a conversation with the devil?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, it took a while, because at first I was hearing angels and demons.
You heard both.
At first, and it was hard to tell which was which. So I actually threw away my credit cards because I was like, oh my God, this is like the tab of my sins that the devil's going to collect. And I'm going through the street trying to pick up all the apocalyptic signs. So I'm grabbing newspapers and magazines, little torn up pieces.
You're on a quest.
Yeah, I'm on a quest to try to figure this thing out. So I fill it up in a plastic bag, and I go into a diner, and I'm sprawling it across the table. And I've got books that I picked up. I have the Bible. I have Aristotle's Poetics, Aristotle's Metaphysics. But you start seeing them in that dimension. And then that's when I hear the devil whisper, there has to be a killing of the old for there to be a rebirth of the new. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I go outside and I see a reality show billboard of world's most eligible bachelor with his gold digger right next to him, and I'm seeing like what the guy looks like a devil and the girl looks like an angel, and I see a whisper from her mouth say life, death, rebirth are the three key words to reverse this curse. And I'm saying, like, there doesn't have to be a killing, and there was some negotiation where I was like, if there's a killing in the media, if there's an apocalypse in the media so horrific that it turns people back to good, we can stop it. And there was like some conversation with the angels and demons that this can happen. And then suddenly I thought, like, I was brought out there by Peter Guber to do this. But as the weight of America's sins, were collecting in my DNA. So, I read in the Bible, Babylon has fallen because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And Babylon's Iraq, and the wine's oil. And I'm looking at, all who buy or sell must use the number of the beast. And I'm seeing this like beast in us. And I'm hearing Iran say we're the great Satan. Suddenly I feel like I'm the Antichrist. So I feel, and suddenly in the peak of this, thing, I go to Peter Guber's office. I walk in there with 3 sticks, branches that I found on the ground. And I walk up to his secretary who's like, and I'm like, tell Peter Guber I know everything. And they stood for life, death, rebirth. And then eventually I run into I'm thinking that like this reality show is going to happen, but I'm thinking like I'm the Antichrist. They're going to sacrifice me like live on TV, and
in a literal way.
Literally. So I go into the Standard Hotel, and this is when the terror of the truth mixes with the terror of delusions that aren't true. And I walk in, and there's no one in the glass case at the time, but I have a flash vision of a naked girl drinking my blood from a champagne glass and my dead body beneath her. And she just sacrificed me.
Terrifying.
And she was going to rebirth. She's in the reality show to rebirth my child, who's the rebirth of the new, and I'm the killing of the old. And that was the life, death, rebirth. And I was such a terror. I picked up a steel case and threw it at the glass case.
In a literal way.
Literally. And they tackled me to the ground. And I heard the hotel security say, I saw him throw it at us, did you? And they kind of got on the same page. It's like, yeah, I saw him throw it at us too. And so that's the story they told the cops, which is assault charge, which is prison time. So they took me to this place called the Twin Towers Prison. So when I go in, they all beat me to the ground and they start spitting out these biblical, mythical rhymes. that like have multiple layers of meaning, and
so everybody was in this state.
Everybody
of
was in this
multiple
state.
layers of reality.
Yeah,
Yes.
and it was clear it was a spiritual initiation. So it was clear like that they're smiling at me while they're beating me, and they're testing to see if I've been to hell and if I embrace it. So I'm supposed to smile back at them and fight them off.
So, Paul, in this state, is there an awareness that the symbolic reality and the tangible reality can at times be almost, slide? So, for instance, you seem now crystal clear, aware that you weren't literally in body going to be sacrificed. You weren't literally the Antichrist in body, but that was a symbolic statement that we all live and have lived in a society that stepped outside the path of the divine way, right? So you were seeing things that were real. You were seeing symbols that we often ignore: MasterCard, money, tree, putting women in glass boxes as commodities. And symbolically, you were onto the truth. You were right. You were unyielding in keeping your eyes open. And at the same time, the sort of level of symbolism from the deep, perhaps archetypal meaning to the tangible physical meaning. Are you bodily being sacrificed, or is the death and renewal one in which we actually get to live in body, but our old way of being must die, that a new way of being, of renewal might rise?
Yeah. Well, there's an interesting thing that Joseph Campbell said. He said the shaman and the psychotic are experiencing the same thing. The difference between them is the shaman can swim in the waters of the unconscious and see the symbols and not personally identify with them. Whereas the psychotic is drowning in the waters of the unconscious because they personally identify with them, and they, take them literally, like you said.
So everybody being held in the prison for the so-called criminally insane were being drowning in the waters. They were drowning. They were aware of the symbolic reality, but had personally, physically, tangibly identified with the symbolic reality, and it was drowning.
That's right.
And so they were holding on and pulling each other down.
Yeah, but at the same time, we were pulling each other up.
Tell us.
Because we were all gaining a better understanding of it through each other. The original film I was supposed to go do, called Revelation, was about a war, a biblical war that builds up in the Middle East over Israel with America, oil, and all of it. And and I was going to make that, and I was going to make that with Spike, and he said, do more research on it. And I did, and it got too political for him, and he said, I can't do this. So I was trying to make that movie. And Touch with Fire was a backup. It was like, okay, I can't do that, so I'll do a film that destigmatizes bipolar.
And the confusion I'm hearing you say was simply, at what level of reality do I read this? Am I literally going to have to physically die for there to be a renewal, or can the death be a death of an old way of being and I will be renewed, and so too can our larger civilization?
When you come out of the mania, you gain clarity about that. You see it was a symbolic killing of the old, rebirth of the new. There needs to be a society that kills off its old ways, but only after you come out of it. It's too much at once, and it's too confused when it happens to you. But it's still, that's the gift. The gift is coming out of it and having it infused in you and living a life that addresses it as best you can,
And was it profoundly transformative? Have you been awakened? Do you live a different life now?
100%. For instance, when I went to Jerusalem to do research on the Revelation Project, I learned about Christ. I didn't believe in Christ, but I, was moved by his story. And when I was at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there's a cave where they put the bodies. And I asked the guy if I could go in that cave and meditate. And I was meditating on being a sinner in Jesus' arms, and I was imagining Jesus' conversation on the last day with the sinners, the prisoners, and I was remembering my time, my conversations with the prisoners in the Twin Towers, and there was a bolt of light so bright that I was afraid I was going to go manic again, and my wife said my eyes changed to yellow for like 4 or 5 days.
Wow.
And she looked up, can eyes change color? And they said if there's a huge shift of mood, it can slightly change color.
But they were like profound mystical experience.
Wow. Yeah.
Paul, what a gift that you're sharing this. In that moment, meditating in the cave, did you feel the presence of Jesus in some way?
I was thanking him and shocked, and I felt ashamed that I didn't believe in him. I feel it when I live in certain ways. Like, so I got into fasting after that. I fasted one time 8 days. I got into, just the appreciation of little tiny things and the shedding of more glitzy, bigger things, and, just looking for ways to feed the spirit and shed the flesh. And that, I do believe that the experience of the Twin Towers opened a portal, that once I was sane and sober, I was able to receive these kind of spiritual experiences.
I'm deeply moved by what you're sharing. It feels like an initiation and a profound mystical journey, mystical quest, because
really intense, very intense.
You had the deep spiritual bearing in your quest to ask to meditate in the cave.
Yeah, it was scary because it was a dark, deep cave, and it felt like there was something a force calling me in, and a force scaring me out. So it almost felt like it was like a test, It was like, but the force that was calling me in was stronger. So I went as deep as I could, and they had these carvings in the rock, just big enough for a human body. So it was like I was slipping my body into an MRI machine coffin.
Wow.
And it was scary at first, but that was the idea of embodying what it's like to be a sinner in Jesus' arms and in letting go in death, And everyone else is up there on the floor worshiping this little shrine where they said they put me in, that the Crusaders removed me from the cave and wanted to separate me from the sinners. You're the one that came down here, and there was a joy in sharing the feeling he had when he was talking with these prisoners that were just like him. I don't know if these were madmen that were misunderstood, like the ones in the Twin Towers. I was put in the Twin Towers prison for being misunderstood. When I was in there, there was parts of humanity that you wouldn't believe. There was a guy handcuffed to a table, and he was begging for water so much he could barely get the words out of his lips. He was mumbling. He was like, water. And no one was giving him water, so I went to the water fountain. I put it in my hands. I brought it over to him. The guard stood in the way. He says, "You want to join him?" And when I didn't listen to the guard and I put it up to his lips, he handcuffed me to him.
Handcuffed you to him?
To him, on the ground. And he cut the circulation off, But when you're sitting on the floor of hell and you're chained to another person's pain and you're sharing it, your wrists are rubbing right up against each other and you're sharing that, there is a sacred bond with humanity that happens in a way that you're with the lowest of the low. And you're connected. And that was the kind of spirit that was in me when I was in the cave.
You felt the same thing in Twin Towers and there? You felt the same kind of...
It was like a recollection.
Wow.
It was like a connection between me and him. And I was just like a sinner wanting to lay in his arms. I wasn't wanting to like worship him or covet him, or there was a love from his story. Keep in mind, I was there for 3 days, and I knew a lot about the Middle East, enough to ask a lot of questions to the tour guide. So I was able to bring out all these stories, and Jesus' story just moved me. And I was like, that's why I wanted to do it. And I was like, I didn't know if there was any divinity per se, but that made it very clear to me. Like, I'm not saying he's the one and only one who has that divinity, but I believe he had that divinity, and he loved me, unconditionally, like intensely. And
as you loved the prisoner to whom you were handcuffed on the floor.
Yes.
For having brought him water in your bare hands.
Yes. And he felt that. I know he felt that.
So for someone struggling with bipolar, how might it be a spiritual opening for them? Can you explain how bipolar can be a time of awakening, and then what the work is afterwards to integrate?
Joseph Campbell said that sometimes when you have a spiritual experience, it's so startling and frightening that the angel appears to you as a demon. But then you come down from the mania And they give you a pamphlet that looks like a hospice brochure, and it tells you bipolar disorder, mental illness, 1 in 4 will commit suicide. You know, you're never going to be the same. You have to embrace this new you. But that's all they get.
So the awakening dimension is nowhere.
It's nowhere. They don't know what they experienced because they weren't told what this thing really is. I was told because I remember when I was stumbling through the streets, 60 pounds overweight, looking for a bartending job, and somehow I couldn't look at anything and have clarity, but somehow I saw the Power of Myth cover of this like mask, this like archetypal mask of the unconscious, and it was Joseph Campbell's Power of Myth. And I don't know why it called to me. I couldn't even read, but it was an audio book, and I was listening to it. I was like, he's describing everything I went through. I know that. And the second thing that what gave me that hope and gave me that path is coming across Kay Jamison's book, Touch with Fire. You know, up until then, it's just a disease. It's, you know, but then I see this book, and it's about this artistic gift that comes with it. The key part is what you talk about the suffering being the door to spiritual awakening. That's the one that a lot of them don't get. You know, 1 in 4 commit suicide because it's an unfathomable hell, you know? And I've been there, like, you know, like I remember I was working at a construction site. I was pushing a piece of wood through a saw, and it was like pulling my hand, the saw. And it was like this mantra, it's not going to get better than this. It's not going to get better than this. And then suddenly, you know, the sparks of the saw look like this warm glow, you know, like a glimpse behind Heaven's Gate, you know, and everything faded away, and like the grinding of the saw felt like a massage of the brain, and it was just pulling me, and I knew just one push, and I would, you know, bleed out to my salvation, and like nothing would exist. That's what people don't understand about suicidal ideation, is that it's like this lure because you're like everything else.
Siren song.
It's a siren song. That's right. That's the thing, is if you come out of it, the other side, you become a beast. Right? Yeah. You become so strong.
What kind of strong is it?
That is purely from the need to kick your way out of hell with such desperation, having to do things that other people don't have to do that are really good for you.
One of my really close friends has extreme ADHD, right? And struggled with being able to pay attention to anything, to focus on anything. He transformed that difficulty into a superpower and actually became the chief design officer of Airbnb. His natural tendency to get distracted by things became an amazing tool if you're designing something, because anything that would distract you is not good design. So just focus on the stuff that doesn't distract you, and that turns out to be good design. Yeah, right.
That's the thing about neurodiversity, you know, and not appreciating neurodiversity is like he might have a bad education on what he should do. Then he clearly discovered I could do something much better. Yeah, you know.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear from a bipolar perspective, like what are the things, the difficulties that come with that, and how have you learned to transform those into strengths and superpowers?
Yeah, so the bipolar is a hypersensitivity.
Okay.
So if you handle things well, you can function much higher than a lot of people around you, you know. You know, I started writing. I did 2 books in a year. I'm on the 3rd. That intensity of writing, it was clear, like, it was with ease because of the bipolar. There was a way, an intensity and a passion and but
a powerful spirit.
Powerful spirit. But if you do little things, like if you don't get Lightbox in the morning, if you know, have sugar, you know, like a couple of these things, and you start to unwind and spiral down, and you feel like this impotent little frail ant. And then when you handle those things right, you feel like this titanic hurricane force, you know, that like,
which you are, your powerful soul, your powerful spirit.
Thank you. And And I do think that comes from the bipolar.
When you say exquisite sensitivity, is there a capacity to perceive? Are you open and more able to know, to receive mystical or transcendent awareness?
Yeah. So the first experience of all those visions happening, like I said, it was a domino series of disasters toppling backwards in time, too fast for me to see. But then when I came out of it, I'm sane, I'm sober. It was like I'm moving forward through time, and piece by piece, these dominoes are lifting themselves into history, and I'm becoming sensitive again to where it's going.
Would you say that now that you've integrated your capacity to perceive, you, in a way that is at peace, see the symbolic reality every day? Are you able to,
I have
having opened your eyes, can you
yeah,
now see
I have
life
a
as
friend,
a symbolic, almost like a play or a film,
Yeah.
a living, true,
Yeah.
authentic, symbolic story?
yeah, that's
A true story.
That's the blessing of this is the last psychosis I had, and it's never going to happen again, is, there was a building up of psychosis between 2018 and 2023-4. I was in an institutionalized for a year straight. They said it was a 5 to 10% chance I was going to come back to my sanity. I kept talking about the Dome of the Rock. I kept talking about Israel, all that stuff. Because I was thinking I was going to make a peace treaty in the Middle East. I thought I was the Antichrist. The Antichrist was supposed to make a peace treaty. I thought they were going to probably kill me for it, but I was going to go to the Dome of the Rock, and the Mahdi, which is the Muslim Messiah, was going to take the peace treaty, and he was going to invite the other religions into the Dome to the Rock to pray together so that no one would want to topple it. And this crazy, idealistic, foolish hope was going to come true. And then I had my last vision from God, sober, in a sane state, which was I'm sitting in the bed. This was really happening. I'm sitting in the bed with my kids and my wife, who I haven't seen in a year, and thank God my wife protected them, and we're reading Choose Your Own Adventure, which is the books where, you can redo it, you can do it again, you can make, and there was a subtext of like me trying to tell the kids, we can do this again. They fell asleep, and I'm sitting there with the book on my own. And keep in mind, it was mushrooms that started to take me into a psychosis again. And that was what I had to stop. And I had to stop the insanity and find peace. When I'm sitting there, I'm thinking about Choose Your Own Adventure. And it says, you come to a fruit. You can either lay in a bed, which will be your deathbed, and eat porridge, and your kids and your wife will be there for you and serve you. Or you could go see God, but you don't know if you'll come back. And I was like, I'll eat in the bed. But then I keep going, and it says, well, you can eat this flower, and you will have to lay in the deathbed, but you can go and find God and come back and tell your kid about it. And you will be able to tell your kid about it. And I'm like, I'll do it, And I have this vision of me going up through into space to find the eye of God, to meet God, to see him, to get this divine vision. And there are these shooting stars, but each one is a birthday cake on one of my kids' birthdays that I'm missing, and their faces look older, and I miss everything in between the birthdays, and their faces look more bitter, and I keep going, and I get to the eye of God, and I see the eye of God, and these tears fall out of the eye of God, and they crystallize into meteors, and they go to destroy the earth, and I'm like, oh my God, my family's gonna be hurt. I need to be down there, but the earth has no gravitational pull on me anymore. I can't see them, and I can't get back to them, and then I get sucked into the eye of God, like a spiral, into the pupil of pure light, and I blink, and suddenly I'm sitting there in a stiff bed, all white sheets, cold, and I'm looking, and standing across from me are my kids in their late 20s. And I haven't seen them since. And they look like they don't even want to be there. And the nurse comes in and says, okay, visiting hours are over. And they're walking out. I'm like, but Christopher, I saw God. I want to tell you about it. I did it for you. I wanted to be the person who saw God so I could do it for you and tell you about it. And he walks out with this bitter voice, says, tell it to God. And he walks out. And I'm like, I don't want to tell it to God, because I knew that was God's voice through his mouth. And I turned to God, and I'm like, I'm sorry, please. I'm like, I want to stop this adventure. I want to do it over. But I knew there's only so many times you could do the venture over. You know, it was a 5-10% chance I wasn't going to come back to my sanity. So it's like, burn the peace treaty. Burn it. You know, and I'll have a peace treaty with you. I'll never go back to my insanity. I won't try to save the Middle East. I won't sacrifice my children, my wife. I'll just, you know, let me have a peace treaty with you. I won't touch mushrooms again. I'll be sane. And I had that peace treaty with God. The peace treaty of the Middle East burned up, and it was just me and God. And that was the vision that I had. That was like the last vision that I had from God, where he was like, okay, we'll do this again. You know, we'll do this again. But it was clear after that, my peace of mind, my family's peace of mind, keeping their peace of mind, keeping my peace of mind while the world goes crazy is my pact with God. Because I went through too much already, panic. And so now the world's going crazy, and I suddenly feel a certain levelness, you know?
Your pact with God is?
To keep my peace of mind for myself and for my family, despite what insanity is going on in the world. And there's a serenity that I did my best.
Maybe the embedded message there is by making a difference in your own self and sanity and the well-being and peacefulness of your family, that's actually how you start to change the world in a more profound way.
Really
instead of trying
that.
to change it all at once, like start with a little circle, and
that makes so much
it goes
sense
from there.
Yeah.
If you were speaking to a therapist or someone in treatment for bipolar, what is something that might not be in that treatment that they need to know, that the jewels, the beautiful golden nuggets of your discovery? What do they really need to know?
The most important, have a doctor that gets the meds right, that's willing to work with you to make it so that you can feel deep emotion, but you're over-medicated and you feel nothing, and that's not going to compromise till they get it right. I'd say it's a red flag if they don't want to try lithium initially, because that's the gold standard, and there are doctors who actually will take money from prescription drug companies to push other drugs, because lithium's an all-natural substance. You can't patent it. Once you get the meds right, then the next one is 8 hours of sleep, no drugs.
No drugs.
No marijuana or hallucinogens. I mean, they open the door and you can get lost in there and you can't find your way back.
But it sounds like one of the gifts of bipolar is that the door's already open.
That's right.
And you don't need
it.
So, Paul, that deep soul in you that wanted to live, the strength of your spirit that did not want to cut off your hand on the saw, and that pushed past the lure of the sirens. Is that in everyone? Do we all have a deep soul? And would it be helpful in treatment of bipolar to speak to the deep soul? The deep soul that's actually witnessing real good and real evil and a true symbolic reality, and offer an invitation to honor this exquisite perceptual capacity, and then take the gentle time to integrate into a roadmap of reality that's a sacred reality.
That's right. 100%. I think that is the key to embracing that hell and embracing it so that you come out of it not only live, but thriving alive, understanding the descent into hell. That's actually the descent into hell at the time feels like it's the worst. But it is actually the biggest gift of all of them. Of all of them, when you are in that hell and there's something in you that is immediately lit in a desperation to outshine the darkness. And when you come out, you have that light for good. And that's the source of your ability to stay afloat, your ability to do all these things. And there's actually a love of it, interestingly enough. That's why the greatest art has the duality of horror and beauty. The greatest art gives the spirit victory over the pain of the body.
Mm-hmm. I've personally learned so much about bipolar today. The amazing gift, if it's treated the right way, the amazing gift of experiencing these emotions, experiencing life, experiencing spirituality, being able to use those things to create beautiful art, to experience things spiritually, to experience emotional resonance, to experience love, to experience pain, to experience the full range of the human condition.
Yes.
And experience. I've learned a lot just by you describing what that's like. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you. I'm glad. I mean,
what a gift.
Yeah.
What an honor. Thank you. What a privilege.
Thank you.